Of course, the very moment that I start this stream, my mic goes out on me. Hey, how's everybody doing? Hey, I am just going to talk today a little bit about the classes coming up, and I'm going to go through some slides. And we're doing this class tomorrow. It's called Heartbreak and Hope, and I'm just going to do kind of a short, somewhat short, not too short, but I'll try to keep it to about a half hour because I'll just get started talking and one knows what will happen. But a bit of a summary of what it is that we're going to be talking about. And tomorrow, it's going to be the police and violence and Tyree Nichols. And we're going to talk to some students in class who have some folks who are in the police, and we'll just see what happens, who have parents or family members who are part of law enforcement. And I just want to walk through some different things. And it's really, I'm calling it Heartbreak and Hope, because if you've watched the video, if you've watched what's happening or what happened, it's just heartbreaking. And if you've seen any of that video, but there's hope because things are shifting, and the entire conversation about law enforcement is shifting here in the United States. So if you haven't, I see that Matt's on. Hey, Matt, nice to see you. I'm going to keep these kind of a little bit light, or a little bit, I should say. I'll just talk a little bit. If you have questions you want to throw into the chat, please do. But again, this is a summary of a class that we'll be doing tomorrow in Social 19. And so Tyree Nichols is a young man who was, I think we could say, murdered. I mean, I think you really have to. I mean, the 5 police officers who are, these gentlemen right here are being charged with murder, and second-degree murder. And if you watch the video, it very much is that. I mean, they killed him. Like they lost their minds and they killed him. And so it's tragic in every way that we can think about it. And so what I want to do in this particular class is talk about just how it is that in a thoughtful way we can think about the police. And in my job, it's a very difficult thing to do. I didn't do the class a couple of weeks ago. My wife advised me we decided, hey, let's not do it right then. Let's just give it a week. And I had a couple other topics that we were going to do in class. So let's give it a week, just a little bit of time before we take this on. But it's very difficult to find a way to talk about this that is meaningful for so many different people with so many different constituencies or audiences. And this is one of those kind of, in a certain sense, a rather extreme case, because I think we mostly can all agree. I mean, it'd be hard not to agree that the police murdered him. But nonetheless, right, once we start kind of breaking things down, emotions run are really high, right? And people take sides. This is when it comes to law enforcement, people very much take sides. And so I'm going to try to find a way to talk about this from lots of different perspectives. And I should add that, I'm going to start it out. I think I'm going to start the class out here that we just a certain perspective that sounds very left. It comes from a more critical leftist perspective, but I don't know how we can get around to this. At least in the United States, here's the concentration of U.S. family wealth, and the richest 10% of Americans control, families, which is about almost 13 million families, control 76% of the wealth, and the middle, 40%, it's 22%, and the bottom 50% of the families, the poorest 50% of families in the United States, control 1% of all the wealth, right? I mean, this is just, it's not that different from at any point in human history, I suppose, in most countries around the world. But the point being that if you're going to create an institution, an organization that's going to exist to adjudicate problems and um, to protect members of society from other members of society who would do them harm in some way, either physical harm or steal from them or something, then uh, you're gonna be, which would be an organization like the police, right? Which we need. Like, let's be clear. Like, I don't think there's anybody who, you know, as a sociologist, I'd be hard pressed to imagine a society that we could create in which we would not need some form of policing, right? At least on a large scale with large institutions and so on. So, um, so we want the police, right? And even people who don't like the police, you're going to kill. You're going to call the police for the things for which you need the police, right? So anyway, but it's hard. It's very difficult for me to not see this and layer policing on top of this and say, look, police, an institution that emerges out of society itself, is probably most organized to protect the interests of the richest 10%. The people that control 76% of the wealth, who have a much greater hand in making the laws and building institutions and so on. I can imagine that the police are much more organized um, to and just a greater the way I would say that, I would say this sociologically in a way that's very different than how I just said it when I say organized, but it's just to not be confusing and get into a bunch of jargon. That it's just not difficult to imagine that the police are more oriented in that direction, right? So when I see police that look like this, I think like, okay, you're a danger in a way to all of us. You're protecting us clearly, right, from people who would really, really want to do us harm. So there are times when you really want to have a group of people who can wear those kinds of uniforms and protective gear and protect us from some evil that's out there lurking, right? Um, but at the same time, I look at human beings who are behind all of that protective gear, and I think, yeah, but in the end, you're more likely to be protecting the interests of the richest part of America than the poorest part of America. So just a thought. And so now let me go somewhere else. Let me also preface what I'm going to preface everything that I'm going to say tomorrow with another idea that, racism uh, um, and unequal treatment toward Black and brown people has just been a part of the United States since the earliest days. Okay, so slavery changed a lot of things. When slavery went away in 1865, well, it didn't really go away, but when slavery was legally abolished in 1865, it 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 meant that something started to change, but it took a long, long time. And we just see a long litany. If you study the United States, you see a long list of ways, myriad ways, in which the Black people and brown people have received unfair treatment in the law enforcement or legal system, right? So this is just like, I'm going to look at just a couple things here. Marijuana use by race, and you just see that, okay, it's more or less the same, right? Like the light blues, these are Black Americans, tend to use a little bit more marijuana. But listen, this is a percentage of the population, so we're talking just a percentage point or so, right? But arrest rate per 100,000 for marijuana possession, it's so much higher for Black Americans. And this is, again, this is just one thing. I mean, I could look at so many different forms. Wherever I turn my attention with regard to the law enforcement, to the legal system and law enforcement, you see that people who are of African ancestry, Native Americans, Hispanic, are more likely to be harmed and just get unfair treatment. How unfair is it? That's another story. That's what we're going to argue about. always, but there's a certain amount of lack of equal protection and equal treatment that absolutely is happening. How much is it? I don't know. I'm just picking one example out. I can pick another example out, and we can look at lifetime risks of being killed by the police. And this is something I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And so for, Black Americans, it's almost 100 per 100,000 people who are Black, right? Which, like, okay, that maybe that's high, maybe it's not high. I'll talk about stuff. This is part of the class tomorrow. But look how much lower it is for American Indians, for Latinos, for white people, for people of Asian ancestry. Okay, so just a thing, right? But when I look at this guy right here, this is a guy who's in New York City, who's just got a megaphone, and he's protesting, he's standing in front of a bunch of police officers and he's yelling at them. I mean, saying stuff to them, right? I kind of have an understanding of that. Like, he's not completely out of line, right? I mean, it comes from someone. The fact that he would pick up this megaphone and speak his mind to the police means something different for him than they mean for me. Again, this is a very complicated issue. And so, like, we want to still be in the, my job is to say, to not be hyperbolic about any of this, right? It's like, Black and brown people don't always get the short end of the stick. There are so many white people that get mistreated by the police, and it doesn't make the front pages of the news, right? And so this is not, my job, what I'm going to do in class tomorrow, is just have this conversation in a way that that starts to make sense. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking. Hang on, let me just see. It's also, Lusted says, they're also like a cultural issue. Certain communities engage in certain activities. Yeah, like, so for Black people, for example, there's a long history of distrusting the police. Like, you look at the origin of policing Black people and slave patrols, and one thing, the origin of the KKK. I mean, it just goes one thing after another. It's like, yeah, of course you're going to distrust the police. If you're poor, you're going to distrust the police. Again, like, kind of starting out how I started, like, there's just a way in which police exist to maintain authority, and the authority of the state. That's the role, right? Their job. This is an institution that's put in place by the state, and it exists to control people who would question and upend the authority of that state. So all of the power arrangements, that's just the nature of policing, right? Part of policing, part of that state is, the system of laws, rules, and regulations that we have in place, right? And those benefit, when a poor person, gets something stolen from him or her by another poor person, that person can call the police and say, hey, I need your help. I got to get my stuff back. Right? And so the police will respond to that. Do they respond differently if it's a rich person? Yeah, we don't have to get into that. The point is that poor people, middle-class people, rich people, they all have the ability to use the police to adjudicate problems that they have and to protect them from other people who would do them harm. I mean, that's the nature of policing, but the policing also exists to protect the power of the state and all the laws that got put in place, including laws that, like, probably have not been put in place by poor and disenfranchised people. They got put in place more so by people with the power to create all the systems that were able to bring about those laws. So anyway, it's just a thing to hold. We always got to hold that, and that's like a kind of a Marxist analysis of sort. It's a very left analysis, but how would anybody? It doesn't matter that sometimes one makes like a kind of leftist neo-Marxist analysis, and sometimes people make a right-wing libertarian conservative analysis that is absolutely true and on point. The leftists are going to make a right-wing argument, and the right-wingers are going to make a leftist argument, and that's kind of the nature of it. And this is one of those. So anyway, I want to start out tomorrow talking about like good cops and bad cops. I'm going to ask some students like, hey, so what makes a good cop? What makes a bad cop? We'll talk about that a little bit. And then, I want to go to this question of, like, we got about 950,000 people who are sworn law enforcement officers here in the United States. And the way I look at it, there's kind of three different types. You got the social workers with guns, and having worked with police and talked to enough of them, I mean, so many of them, it's like people joining the military. I want to protect people, right? The reason I want to be a police officer, the reason I want to join the Army or the Marines or whatever, because I want to go places and I want to protect people. And that's just fundamental. So I call them social workers with guns. And then you got the other folks that are just workers. They don't really care. It's just a job. Yeah, I needed a job. I saw the police were hiring, and so I took a job. Or you get the power-hungry bullies, and the people who are really, really, really wanting to, maybe they don't even know it. Maybe like they were, whatever it is, like they just put the badge on, they put that gear on, and like, man, they just become bullies. And or that taps into or it brings something out of them, like these 5 police officers that killed Tyree Nichols. So in any case, the question is, well, how many of each group? We're going to argue about this, but well, I don't know. I feel like it's really hard to have an opinion about it if you don't talk to the police, if you don't spend time with police, if you don't, talk to not just a couple police who you got to really investigate, have conversations with, spend time with, talk with police to get a sense of like how many police officers, what percentage or proportion of police officers are in each group. And I've spent a lot of time around police, and I actually think that it's mostly 1 and 2 is where most of them are. If you're like critical of the police, you're going to say it's 3, and you're going to make this rash statement. And I'm going to say, on what basis are you making that statement? And you might say, well, the basis of my personal experience, right? But your personal experience isn't all police. Maybe, you live in a neighborhood where there's like a lot of policing, and the police happen to be particularly aggressive. And but that's not all police. And so 950,000 different sworn police officers across the United States. Your neighborhood does not represent all police. And so my own particular experience, including having lived in those neighborhoods, it's mostly 1 and 2. Okay. When police make mistakes. So then I want to talk a little bit about this, right? What happens when police make mistakes? Because they do, right? And one thing that I always want to point out is that, you've got, there are 65 million police encounters about approximately, right, in the United States every year, 65 million. Okay. 10 million arrests on average in the United States. That means like it's called police contact, the degree to which police have contact with other folks, and or with citizens. And there's and so like about one in 6 in the United States ends up in some kind of arrest, right? And this is a lot. So the contact isn't like the police driving down the street, and somebody waving at the police officer, or just the cop like stopping somebody and saying like, hey, how's your coffee, or that sort of thing. These are contexts in which information is exchanged in some way. And so when you think about what happened with Tyree Nichols, and we think, oh my God, this is a representation of police, but think of that in the context of 65 million police encounters and 10 million on average arrests. And it really leads us that we have to realistically and thoughtfully take a step back and say, what does that mean, right? How exceptional is this, right? How common is it? How normal is it? How exceptional is this? Like they were part of this unit called the Scorpion Unit, right? So first off, I've been like really struck by how the leadership in the Memphis Police Department. This happens if you're not from the U.S. It happened in a state called Tennessee in a city called Memphis. How the police department itself has the leadership in the police have been able to um, not be sort of challenged and so on, right? But they created the Scorpion unit. They're called the Scorpions, first off. They're not called the sheep. They call them scorpions. They go out and they sting. They attack people. They sting people. They attack people. A scorpion attacks like in the dead of night, like when you really can't, you don't really see them. Not always in the dead of night, but 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 you don't really see them, and then they sting you, and then it's really it's very painful. And so they call this unit. That's what they call the unit. And they sent them out to be aggressive, like hyper aggressive. And they put all these like big muscular people on the Scorpions unit. And like this is what the leadership of the city decided. This is how they were going to try to control crime in certain neighborhoods in Memphis. Right? So this is so in that neighborhood, this kind of aggressive policing was not uncommon at all. In fact, we're reading about it. People have been talking about it since the unit was created. But nonetheless, you have to be thoughtful and just thoughtful about what we're really talking about. So I'm going to go through some other data that I've gone through before, but about these issues. So this is up to date as of like just a few days ago. How many people have been killed by the police in the United States, and since January 1st of 2015, and the number is 8,166. Again, as of a few days ago. Okay, so now the question is that a lot of people? Is it not many people? We have 65 million encounters a year. We have 10 million arrests, meaning that people are engaging with police constantly. We have 400 million guns in the United States. We have a lot of law enforcement, and we have lots coming together. A lot of things can go wrong at any one time. We have 8,166 people killed by the police. Okay, so then the question becomes, all right, who are the people who are killed by the police? What are their numbers, right? So here in the U.S., what makes the front page are people who are Black who are killed by the police, and so that it becomes this thinking that okay, it's mostly or only Black people who are killed and sometimes murdered by the police. In the case of Tyree Nichols, but I'm going to say killed by the police, right? And so here are the numbers, right? And so white people are 60% of the population and represent 51% of the people who are killed by the police. Black people are 12.6% of the population and represent 27%. So, really more than double of what we would expect, or what should be the case if the police were engaging with citizens. First off, stopping people, arresting people, jailing people, and then when things go bad, kill people equally across different groups. Then for that number for next to Black people would be far lower. For Hispanics, it's really comes in about the same number. But it's tragic. Like this is tragedy, right? This is heartbreak. And so then we say, okay, of the 8,166 people killed by police, how many were unarmed? Because when we go back here and we think, okay, all of these human beings, their lives were taken by the police. So we killed by the police. So when you say that, right, when you say those words, it's like, oh, the police are killing people. And what we see are situations like Tyree Nichols, and we imagine it's like people are murdered by the police, the people who haven't done anything, and the police and these like really aggressive tactics, they go and they kill people. So how many were unarmed? And so, we think, all right, well, how many, right? Well, here are the numbers, right? People attack police with a lot of things, right? Blunt objects, hammers, baseball bats, clubs, also, hatchets, right? Those are blunt objects. And then the other category would be hatchets, swords, like who knows all the kinds of things that people, well, you just read about it. Um, okay. So people coming at police in their cars, 463 unarmed, 702. These data, by the way, are coming from the Washington Post. The Washington Post has spent the past number of years really digging deep into the statistics that are generated by law enforcement agencies at the state, county, and local level here in the US, and the national level, right? National Park Service and so on, to really collect these data and get as much information as we can about who the people are whose lives have been taken by the police. So undetermined or unknown. Okay, so some of that is just because they're very recent and it takes a while for the numbers to come in over the past several months, number of months. But some of it is like we just don't know, because every policing agency is not obligated to report, and people haven't just sort of gotten up to speed on it. So if we come back here as well, the unknown is 1,000 people. Right? We don't know the background of 1,000 people. And you might be a conspiracy minded person and say, okay, those are all the police organizations that are refusing to or not wanting to count because, the people they killed are Black and brown, or they're Muslim, or there's something about them that gives them some kind of minority status, right? It would make the police look bad. I'm not a conspiracy theorist in that way. And what I know about data and what I know about collecting data and these kinds of data and policing is like, my guess is that those numbers, the unknown numbers, will pretty much match what we see in the numbers above. Maybe slightly be skewed toward Black and brown people, but I don't think very much. Okay, same here. The undetermined or unknown, a relatively few people who, of that 702 number, relatively few of them would be unarmed. So it's not the police that are protecting themselves because they killed another unarmed person. Okay, if you're a conspiracy minded person, you're going to think that, but I'm not a conspiracy minded person, and so I don't think that. I think some of them are, for sure, that police are protecting themselves, but mostly it's not. That's not the case. So unarmed people, 463 of what we know, 186 were white. And the red number there, the way I put that, that's what the number should be. If white people were being killed, unarmed white people lives were being taken by police at the same rate as unarmed Black and brown people, that number should be 278 next to white people. The 148 Black people unarmed Black people whose lives have been taken since 2015, that number should be 60. If there was no racism, there was everything, all things being equal, Hispanic people would be about the same. And this is, so again, you think about, so I want to go back to this, right? This is a big number. This is something that we really, I had a conversation with a police agency, and I've had talked to a lot of police officers about this. They have no idea. They had an idea that the number of unarmed people is much higher because they read the news just like everybody else. But people come at police with guns. They come at them with knives. They come at them. Sometimes they come at police and the police shoot them. And I think to myself, dude, why'd you have to kill the guy? Why'd you have to kill them? Just shoot them in the legs or do something or run away. Get inside your patrol car. They have a knife. So get inside your patrol car and just lock the doors and wait for something to happen. Why do you got to kill people? But when I talk to police, it's yeah, I mean, this is the policing that we've created. Okay, so we could do it differently. They could do it different. I can't even weigh in on that. I know that there are situations when yeah, you didn't need to kill that person, but I also know of situations in which police are harmed. People come at police. And when I talk to police and they're really thoughtful and they're protecting their lives too, you know what I mean? So like, I can go round and around on this. I'm just touching it just to say that I can see it. I can go here, I can go here, I can go back here, I can go up front here. I can look at this from a dozen different ways. And all I can say is that, yeah, it can be complicated. So honoring people. So here we go. Here's where some of the hope is. And again, if you tuned in, if you haven't, this is what I'm going to talk about in class. We have 46 million Black Americans. 37 Black people were killed, but unarmed Black people were killed by police in 2015, 7 in 2022. And 62 million Hispanic Americans, 21 down to 3, and white Americans, 31 down to 9. And a big part of this is changing the way we police and training for police, body cameras, patrol car cameras, the ways in which we are having this conversation about policing today that is different than it was 7 years ago, 10 years ago. And more police aren't being killed, by the way. So if you're thinking, oh yeah, well, the police are more likely to have their lives at risk, that's not the case. More police are not being killed today than they were 7, 8 years ago. So this is the hope that something is like, yeah, the things are shifting. You know, we're having a kind of conversation that I think really matters. Speaking of police being assaulted, you know, 2020, the last year for which I have good data, about 60,000 officers, and it's probably that pretty much every year. Some of the assaults that are claimed by police officers, you know, if you just like push a police officer's hand away from you or whatever, they can call that assault. So a lot of this is just these are trumped up charges, and 30% of them injured. Some of the injuries are injured. Listen, man, I'm just, you got a scratch on you or something. You have a little bit of a bruise on you. That I'm like, come on, you know, like is that really an injury? Is that what we're talking about? But because in fairness, the police have to be checked also on some of this stuff. And so 46 felonious deaths on the part of police officers. Most police who die in the line of duty, they die from heart attacks and car accidents, and not from being killed by people. So when you see, you know, information on police deaths, but if you die in a car accident in the line of duty, you died in the line of duty, and so that's a police death. Felonious deaths would be, well, if it's a car accident and someone intentionally ran the police officer, then that's a felonious death. But most police officers who die in the line of duty do not die at the hands of people who have attacked them. So, but nonetheless, 46. You know, if my father, my child, or my friend is a police officer, I want that person coming home alive. I don't want them having their life taken wrongfully by somebody else. So, a couple final things here, and I'll wrap it up. This is just from this past summer. The Gallup asked folks, like, you know, who do you have I have a great deal of confidence in the police. Republicans here in the United States, 67% said yes. Democrats, 28% said yes. And so, you know, we're kind of we're in really a pickle here, so to speak. Anyway, final thing. Last week we had a protest here in State College by people who were protesting in support of Tyree Nichols. And, you know, these were some of the folks. Now, I should point out that very few of those people are Black. Most of them are white. And some of these signs, you know, like abolish the police, you know, like no, fuck you, State College police, right? Abolish the police. No police on campus, right? ACAB, all cops are bastards. That's what that means. And and so like all cops off campus, like what are you talking about, cops off campus, right? What are you talking about? All cops are bastards. 950,000 sworn law enforcement officers, all cops are bastards. It's like this sort of thing probably is not the kind of thing that is really particularly good for us. So just going to divide us even more. Anyway, that's my class tomorrow. I'm going to do that with students and try to do it in a way that just really makes, it's thoughtful, right? It's really difficult to be thoughtful about this. I want, we need to have different voices, and I've been really lucky enough to work with police, and there's probably, I was saying this to somebody earlier today, I don't know of anybody who's more just distraught. I mean, say, police, dude, I watched a police officer, a cop. I was in a group with a police officer. It was a group of police and me. I was doing a session, and this guy was in tears. He was talking about George Floyd and the cop that killed him, and this cop was in tears. Like he's cried. He just said that I watched that, and he said I broke down. He said I was with a group of other police officers, and we broke down. All of us. We watched George Floyd having his life taken by a cop. It was so sad and so unnecessary, and then also it makes our jobs, that's what they said, just so difficult. People hate us. It's like I don't want to be in this job where I drive down the street, instead of waving at me and saying hello, people give me the finger and yell at me, or they just ignore me. It's like, who wants to be in a job like that? He said, that's not why I got into policing. And it's heartbreaking. So I know, I look at, Tyree Nichols, and I think, hey, man, police, it's not what they're taught, right? It's not what they're taught. And police are going to do that kind of stuff. And, but just like I can't look at the actions of one person in the UK, one Brit, and say like, oh, all Brits act like that because one person did. Well, or one American, or one Penn Stater, or one anything. Well, I can't, nor can I, should I do the same thing with police? So yeah, it would be interesting to have a police officer join. We do have a guy in class who was a police officer. He's Korean, and he was a cop on a military base, on a U.S. military base in Korea, as part of his military training. But yeah, it's just sad. It's really sad. But anyway, so this is me trying to be thoughtful about what this means, and having had the opportunity to talk to so many police, I feel like police are really very much misunderstood. There are bad cops, and in the police that I've worked with, I remember doing a ride along once with this one police officer, and we pulled up on this scene, and the cop says, "Oh shit." And I said, "What?" As we're pulling up on the scene, he's like, "Oh, there's so and so. Let's call him Mark, right? Mark's here." Another cop had pulled up ahead of us, right? And I say, "Why? What's that mean?" He said, "Well, what it means is this is very much more likely to go south now. This is a very simple call. I know who's calling. It's a call that we get often, but this cop, he's going to escalate it. He's always escalating shit. And it's annoying. And it just means that it's much more likely that we're going to arrest somebody and have to take them down to the station and book them when we don't have to arrest them." He said, "We can just talk to them. We'll work it out. But this one cop is going to make it much more likely that we do." And he's like, and and his take is that, it's just in that moment, right? Talking with other police officers about like, well, who are the assholes in your department, right? Like, who are the assholes? It's like, well, they said, listen, we're not going to name names because some of them that we think are assholes might be in this group right here, but we all know who the assholes are. and we don't like them, and we can't easily get rid of them because that's just the nature of life, right? They're not assholes enough that they can get fired, although sometimes they do get fired, right? But they're just assholes enough that they just make it bad for everybody else. And some are assholes enough that they should be fired and they don't get fired because leadership is not taking responsibility in the way that they need to take responsibility, and one thing after another. There's so many, anything you can imagine is going on, right? But also, if you don't spend time with the police, if you've never really been part of policing, then it's really hard to have an opinion about what it is because you don't necessarily know. And that's one thing I've learned about many things in this life, is that it's you really got to go out and have experiences. So anyway, that's class tomorrow. So I don't know. Anybody have a final comment? To all arrests end on record? No. A lot of arrests, they arrest people and then they just take them down to the station and they drop the charges and that sort of stuff, right? So lots of stuff goes on, and police have so much discretion. By the way, anybody who's watching, they have so much discretion, y'all, right? So if you hang on, I gotta lower my shade. Don't give police problems, man. Like, the thing, dude, just follow what they say, right? And don't say stuff like, yeah, you're only arresting me because of X, Y, or Z. Like, don't do that, right? Or you only pulled me over, or you only talking to me or hassling me because of whatever. Like, just don't do that. Just follow. You're much better off, man. Really. Yeah. So taking someone to the station, like, so for example, yeah, that's an arrest. If you get in the police car, you're going to be in handcuffs. Like, they're not going to just put you in the back of the police car. Well, rarely, in rare instances, will you, right? Because now you're on their watch. So there are any number of things that could happen. So you put in the police car, they take you down. Technically, that's the beginning of an arrest, but they can get down there and they can just say, okay, listen, man, here's what needs to happen, and then they let you go, right? So it gets pretty. Yeah, you're only arresting me because I'm 5'9". Yeah, exactly. All right, man. I'm gonna do more of these. Like, what I'd like to do is increasingly, either before my class or after my class, do a thing like this where we can. I can just maybe take some kind of questions, or maybe it's after class. But normally I wouldn't go all the way through it like this. I'll just pick a few things out. But today I just felt like talking and thinking it through. All right, I got to go. I have to go to another meeting. Be well, and we'll be in class tomorrow at 3:00 Eastern time. So we'll see what happens. All right, thanks everybody. Really appreciate it. I'm gonna sign off now.